if you're wanting to come back and rewatch this video, what we're going to be able to cover in this session, and you can follow along when you do watch the video, to go through everything that I'm taking you through here to make it easier for you. But what do we need? Well, first off, Azure Data Studio. It's a multi-platform application that allows us to work on both a Windows, Mac OS, and Linux environments. And that's the tool that we're going to be working in for the entire time. So that we can get our source control integration and being used inside of Azure Data Studio, we're going to need some form of a local repository. Now for this session, what we're looking at is using Git. And just like Azure Data Studio, Git allows us support for both Windows, Mac OS, and Linux platforms. So you're completely covered. Taking that one step further, we want to be able to collaborate with our work colleagues who may be sitting beside us, maybe in another office, maybe another state, or even in another country. So we need to have some form of a remote repository that we can configure and push our changes to. In this session, we're going to use both Azure DevOps and GitHub, and I'll show you how easy it is for you to incorporate those, configure them, and use them. And lastly, we're going to be using SQL Server. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's on premises or cloud, whatever that version you're using, this is the code that we're going to be placing into our database projects, into our source control. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Now, I did mention that this session was a very heavily demo-based, and that's it. We're out of slides already, and we're only a couple of minutes in. So with that, let's dive in and have a look at what we're here to talk about. Azure Data Studio. Some of you may have already been using Azure Data Studio, or if you're a first-time user to Azure Data Studio, when you first start this up, this is what you'll be greeted with, okay? The welcome page, it's got some fantastic quick links for getting you started with your journey. But how do we go about getting that? Well, we just open up our browser of choice and we come to the docs.microsoft.com specifically for the download and install for Azure Data Studio. Now, you may or may not be aware, but with Management Studio, if you're doing a brand spanking new install of Management Studio, you'll get Azure Data Studio as well. Now, I did mention that it's multi-platform, and if we scroll down just a little bit, we can see here, as I mentioned, Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. Now, for this session, I'm doing everything in the Windows environment, okay, because I'm working on my local laptop. So I would use this user installer, download, install. Now, I mentioned we needed that local repository for our source control. Easy enough for us. We've got Git for Windows, okay? Download and install the binaries, choose where we want our local repository to be placed, and we're ready to go. Like I mentioned, it supports both Mac OS and Linux. So depending on what platform you're in, you can do exactly the same as what I'm going to take you through in today's session. Now, I did mention about Azure DevOps as well as GitHub. Now, I've already got both of these configured, okay? If we come here, we can see that inside of my Azure DevOps, I've already got a project, ADS demo projects, and I've got a remote repository called ADS import project, okay? As you can see, it's a blank, empty project specifically for this session. The same if we come along and have a look at our GitHub, I've got an ADS create project, and like our import project, we've got no code in it. This is now our starting point on how we go about configuring this into our environments so that we can utilize this and get started on our journey. So with that, let's go back to Azure Data Studio. Now, the beauty of Azure Data Studio is that because it is so lightweight, depending on the work that you want to do, you choose the type of extension that you want to install for you to be able to undertake those tasks. Easy enough. We come to the extensions environment, and as you can see, we'll just give ourselves a little bit more real estate. You can see I've already got a number of extensions already installed. I've also got a large number of extensions available for me to pick and choose from based on that workload. Now, given that we're here to talk about database projects in Azure Data Studio and combining that with source control, what do we need? Well, we need 3 extensions. And to have a look at those, we can just do a search. So we'll just do a search first off for DACPAC. And this is the first extension I want to bring to your attention that you will need to have installed and utilize so that we can put our database code into projects. Now, the DACPAC, we need that because database projects uses that to be able to create our packages and deploy those changes to whatever environment or destination target that we're placing those to. Our second extension is the SQL Server Schema Compare. Okay, now we're going to be using that so that we can compare our source and our destination to determine what are those differences or changes between them so that we can know these are the changes that we've got in our database project. They don't exist in our target. This is what we're going to be deploying. You might not want to deploy all of the changes, so you're able to use Schema Compare to understand what those differences are. And the third one that we need is projects or SQL Server or SQL database projects. Okay, that's what we're going to be working in so that we can place our database code into projects, making it easy for us to manage and maintain, combining it with our source control to be able to share with our colleagues. Now, given that I've already installed these projects, it's easy enough for you to get up and running with it. Instead of it saying uninstall, you would just click install and you're at the same point. If you happen to work in an environment where you've got Azure Data Studio installed, you can't just go out and connect directly to the internet and therefore install it. What you can do is get the V6 files. So the extensions, when they are installed, they come to us as a V6 file. You can download and get that V6 file, hand it off to your security team so that they can do all of their checks and balances and place this V6 file on a shared location that you've then got access to. Once you've got access to that shared location with the V6 file, we come up here and we just say install from V6 and you're at that same point. So we're ready to go. We've got our local repository installed, we've got Azure Data Studio installed, and we've also got access to our remote repositories. Well, what's next? Well, inside of Azure Data Studio, we need to be able to configure our source control. Nice and simple as well. So we come to our source control environment and we can see we've got a number of options. The open folder, we'll come back and have a look at that. First off, we're going to clone a couple of repositories, and this is where we're going to clone our Azure DevOps and our GitHub remote repositories so that we can configure those against our local repositories, therefore being able to easily share this code with our colleagues. So to do that, we just come out to our Azure DevOps again. Come on, there we go. We come to our project and we look at cloning. We'll just take a copy of that, go back into Azure Data Studio. And as easy as that, what it's going to do is ask us for where do we want this to be placed, okay? And this is where we want it to be placed into our local repository, which for me, I've made it nice and simple. So C drive, presentations, Git repositories. I've got nothing, we just hit the select location and away we go. Now you can see it's popped up and it's downloading that project to our local repository. This shouldn't take too long, and there we go, it's completed because it's a brand spanking new empty project. Now I'm not going to open that repository that we've just created. I'm going to clone our second one, which is going to be for our GitHub repository. Same process, we come to our GitHub repository and we say clone, we come back into our Azure Data Studio, and like we did before, it'll ask us for where do we want it to go to. Nice and simple. We just go back to our local repository. And this just shows you how easy it is. There's our import project that we created before, how easy it is to use either GitHub or Azure DevOps in configuring that and using that inside of Azure Data Studio. Now, if I was to click open, this would just open up the folder that we've literally just cloned. Okay, I don't want to do that because we're going to use multiples. So we're going to use this open folder. And what this allows us to do is navigate to any location that we've got our local repositories configured in. Okay, so you may have already inherited a database project from somebody else who's created it in VS Code or Visual Studio. No problems, you can navigate to those, open them up, and manage and maintain those projects inside of Azure Data Studio. For us, we're going to go back to our local repository. So I see presentations, Git repositories, and we can see we've got both of them there, and I'll open those. Now you will notice that Azure Data Studio is actually restarting. That's expected because what it's doing right now is setting up the workspace that we need to have in place so that we can work inside of our source control as well as our database projects inside of Azure Data Studio. While that is working through and just making sure that all of our services have started up, you will see that I've got a number of connections available to us in my system. One of the questions that I do get quite frequently is Azure Data Studio just for Azure? No. As we can see here in my connections, I've got my local connections. I've got containers which I've got set up where I've got Docker running on my workstation. I've also got Azure resources. So we can see here I've got an Azure SQL Database connection, Custo connection, or a PostgreSQL database connection. Okay, so regardless of what environment you're looking after, whatever it is, on premises, cloud, Azure Data Studio allows you to manage and maintain your data platform. So that's now configured. So what we need to do is come to our source control so that we can now see that I've got those two projects opened. We'll give ourselves a little bit more real estate and we can see here's the two names of the projects that we worked with. A little tip, if you are going to be working with multiple remote repositories, i.e. different types, like I'm showing you here for GitHub, as well as Azure DevOps, when you create your branch, name that branch appropriately. It'll make your life so much easier when you are working inside of Azure Data Studio. And so we can see here my ADS Create project, because of the name that I've given that remote branch, it makes it nice and simple. I just prefixed it to say that this is coming from GitHub. It's our ADS Create project, and it's the main branch. The same for Azure DevOps, prefixed it with ADO, so I know where that's coming from. Otherwise, when we open it and we see it here, it's just going to be connecting to main or master, okay? How do you know where that is? You can find that out, but it's not as simple, okay? This makes it nice and simple. We can easily see this project is going to that remote repository. Now that we've got our local repository and our source control configured, we need to be able to work with our database projects. So we just come to our database project section, and we can see that we've got a couple of options available on how we can go about creating our database projects. We can create new, which means that we create it from scratch. Now we're going to have a look at that one second. As I mentioned just before, if you happen to already have a project or a number of projects that you've inherited, whether they have been created in VS Code or inside of Visual Studio, or like what we're doing now, we're going to create a couple of projects, you could come here and say open existing. But the first project, so that I introduce you to what they look like, how we work with them inside of Azure Data Studio, we just want to come up here and we say create project from database. If we were to do that, that's going to open up the menu options for us so that we can go and create that. Alternatively, which can make it a little bit easier for us, if we do come to our connections, now I'm using for this SQL Server 2016 and SQL Server 2019 instances on my local workstation. Don't be concerned that they are 2016 and 2019. They are literally just sources and targets that I'm using for this demo. But we're going to connect to our 2016 environment. So just by connecting to that, this shouldn't take too long for us to connect. There we go. We should expand out. Come on. We can actually then expand out, go to our database, and we've actually got the same option that I showed you just before inside of the database projects. And my laptop's decided to go to sleep for a second. But we can say create project from database. Okay. What do we want to choose? So it already pre-populates for us the 2016 instance that we're connected to. We've got our database that we're wanting to use, but we can see all of the databases that we've got in that instance. So I'm going to stay with the AdventureWorks Lite 2016. We need to give our project a name. Now you'll see here by default, it gives you the name as database project prefixed onto the front of your database. We can call this whatever we want. So I'm going to keep it nice and simple and just mimic what we are doing. So the DP import, the location, this is where we navigate to our local repository, and we're going to the import project repository. Because all of our changes are then going to be saved into that local repository. Now, the big thing to remember here when you are importing is understanding or choosing what your folder structure is. So if we come here and have a look, we've got a number of options available to us. It doesn't matter which one you choose. It's completely up to you and how you like to work. I'm going to keep it the schema and object type because for me, it's a very good logical grouping of all of our objects based under those schemas. And the likelihood is that we could have multiple schemas inside of a database. So with that, we can hit create. We'll give ourselves a little bit more real estate. And what that's doing is connecting to our SQL Server 2016 environment, interrogating that database that we've chosen, and creating a DAC pack to export the contents out of that database and place them into our database project. This shouldn't take too long for this demo because it is such a small demo database that we are using. And once that completes, hopefully that doesn't take too long and my laptop hasn't decided to completely go to sleep on us. But we can see while that is working, we're starting to get some changes in our source control that we can see. And we can see there that our extract has completed and we've automatically opened up our database project. With this, right, now that we've got our project, the first thing that we would want to be able to do is come in here and we want to do a build, okay? And all this is going to do is go away and check that we've got no errors in the code that we've just imported into the project so that we are able to then deploy this. Now, we shouldn't get any errors or warnings, and that should pop up quite soon because we've literally just imported it. But if somebody had made some changes to the database and saved some code in that database that was not quite right, then our build would break and it would tell us here. Given that we've now got our project code and we can see that we've got a number of changes over here in our source control, so we've got 42 pending changes, we want to be able to deploy this into a new environment. Easy enough for us to do. We come to our project and we just say publish. When we do publish, we then need to choose where are we publishing this to. And you can see here that we've got a couple of options. So publish to an existing server. Now that means, like I mentioned, inside of Azure Data Studio, we can manage and maintain any environment, whether it be on-premises or cloud. So as long as we're able to get a connection to that, we can choose that existing server. Or we can choose publish to a container. Like I mentioned, I'm running Docker on my local workstation, and it's just another location, but it's a slightly different flavor, so we need to have it as a different option for us to choose. I'm going to stick with the publish to an existing server, and we just choose where are we going to put this. So I'm going to place this into my 2019 environment. Okay, we've got a profile. We don't really need to worry about the profile. This is more from if you're used to using or working with database projects inside of Visual Studio, you could create a profile file which has values in it that are able to be used as part of this publish process to be able to change the values based on the environments that you are deploying to. We're not going to touch on that. And then we choose what's the database that we're going to be deploying to. Once again, we can call this whatever we want, but we're going to keep it simple and keep it aligned with our database project. So it'll be called DP import. Now we can see down the bottom right-hand corner here, we've got a couple of options available for us to do this publishing. We can generate scripts or we can publish directly. Now I'm going to publish directly. So with that, it's going to go away, and the first thing it's going to do is redo that build. Once it's completed that build, it's going to create that DAC pack, which is what's using that extension that we spoke about at the very start, so that we can have that DAC pack connect to our 2019 instance and deploy those changes into the 2019 instance. And so we can see here that we're currently doing that deploy, right? Taking that created DAC pack and we're putting it to our 2019 instance against the database DP import. Now that shouldn't take too long because it is such a small project that we are using. If we come to our local instance and we expand our databases, we can see we don't have that yet. It's still running, okay? The thing to take away from this though is that we're not taking any data. It literally is just the structure, so the objects that are in that database so that we can then deploy it. While we're waiting for that to finish, if we come back to our database project, what we do want to take note here, and specifically for the second half of the session today, is around this structure, okay? So we can see here that we're broken down because we chose schema and objects, and we can see that our deployment has finished successfully, so that's a bonus for us. But by default, most databases, we're going to have some DBO objects. And we can see here we've got functions, stored procedures, tables, user-defined data types. And we've got an additional schema as well. We need to know about that so that we can keep our projects very standard, especially if what we're going to do now, where we're going to create a project from scratch. So to do that, we just say create project. And when we do create a new project, once again, we've got a couple of options available to us. A SQL database, which goes with what I've spoken about, that we can do this to our on-premises environments, physical, virtual, it doesn't matter, or our cloud environments, okay? So whether that's an IaaS, managed instance, Azure SQL database, it doesn't matter. Or if we're going to SQL Edge, because SQL Edge is a slightly different variant of the SQL Server binaries that we're going to be deploying to. For this one, we're just going to stay with our SQL database. And just like we did for our DP import, we need to give our project a name. And we're going to keep it simple, DP create. So these align with what we've got already in place in our remote repositories. Just like we did for our import project, we need to choose our location. Where are we placing this? And we're going to place it into the create project because it's a brand spanking new project. The thing to take away from here is our target platform. Depending on where you're going to be deploying to, this becomes very important, okay? We don't want to choose 2005, and yet in our code, we've created objects that are utilizing features from 2019. So knowing where you're going to be deploying is a big part of it. And as you can see, we're covered from 2005 to 2019 to Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL Data Warehouse. We're just going to stay with our 2019 and we'll hit create. It's completed already. And as you can see, it was very quick because when we come to our DP create, it's only created that structure. And this is why I wanted to take you through the import first, so that you could get an idea as to what you needed to do and plan for when you are creating a project from scratch. Easy enough. We're going to keep it exactly the same. And we say build folder, right? So that's going to be our schema, which is DBO. And then for our DBO, we're going to have a couple of lots of objects. So we're going to have tables. We're going to have some stored procedures, and we might have some views that we want to have. Okay, so that's just created those structures. And you can see that our pending changes in source control is growing because we've got both of these projects inside of our local repositories. For our tables, easy enough. We then come and say add table, give it a name. And this will create a script for us that is templated. And we'll just give ourselves a little bit more real estate here. That's already templated, right, on what we would look at creating. Okay, so we can see this one. It gives us a bit of a start for our demo table one. Given that this is a demo and I want to try and keep it a little bit realistic to what you would have, I've pre-created some scripts. So here we go, a demo table one. It's a very small table, but representing what we would look at creating. Now, the thing to remember here, we're not creating this inside of our database. We are creating the scripts inside of the project. So we don't want to hit the run command. All we're looking at doing is we're saving that script. To make it a little realistic, because we're going to have multiple objects, we'll just quickly create a couple of more objects for us. And we've got these pre-created, so keep it nice and quick. And we can't have some tables if we can't, populate those tables. If you've got any questions, feel free to fire them into the chat. That's being looked at on my behalf, and I'll be able to answer those for you. But we'll just get these done. So we can see here a demo table, demo stored procedure, very simple. We're just populating that stored procedure. We'll just do a quick second one, and then we'll be good to go. All right, so we've got a couple of objects that we've now created. Like we did for our DP import, if we come up here and we say build, right? Because we want to know, have I made any issues with the scripts that I've created? Hopefully the demo gods are with me and I get 0 warnings, 0 errors, and we're ready to deploy. Okay, 0 warnings, 0 errors. Excellent. So with that, we would then look at publishing, just like we did with our import, right? We're going to keep with our existing server. We're going to connect to our 2019 instance again, and we're going to keep it at DP create. But this time I'm going to show you we can do the generate script. And what that's going to do is it's going to run that build process again to make sure that we haven't got any problems. And then it's going to interrogate the project and generate a script that we're able to then use to deploy this in any environment. We could save this script into source control, allowing our colleagues to have access to it, or we could deploy it directly into our 2019 environment. And we can see there that we've completed successfully. Now, we can't just deploy this straight away because it's showing us some errors inside of the script. Okay? That's okay, because you may not be aware, or if you do, this is because the script has been created using SQL CMD, which allows us to have some variables to make our script very easy to use and deploy. To use that inside of Azure Data Studio, very simply, we come up here to our Enable SQL CMD, and our script is now ready to execute. We'll just connect to our 2019 instance. We're connected to the master database, and we can then deploy that script straight to our access physical location. That shouldn't have happened for us. What it would normally go and do, so we've had a problem with the creation of that particular file in our environment. If I quickly, where's our dp create, let's just, there we go. Let's run that. We'll create a brand spanking new, access denied. So I'm having a problem against my C drive right at the moment. That's a bit disappointing. Let's quickly, should be able to hopefully quickly fix that. Where were we? Very interesting as to why that's giving me a problem. Okay. Then my gods are against me with that creation. We created the import. What that would normally look at doing is creating our new database in our 2019 environment. At that point in time, what we would look at doing is our colleagues may need to be adding some additional changes. Okay, so we've already pushed our changes up to our remote repository, and they come in here, and we need to create some objects on a different schema. So just like we saw for our import, all we would need to do is first off, because we are using an additional schema, we need to have a folder which is called security, okay? And for that security, we would then just go add a script. Once again, these names can be whatever you want from the script file names. And what this is going to do in this one is where we need to be able to create our schema, okay? Because it needs to be created first as part of that build and deploy process before we're able to add those objects. At that point, we're now able to say, okay, we're going to have a control schema. With that control schema, we're going to have our add table, and we're going to have tables. We're going to have some stored procedures. Oops. The file, we want to create a folder called stored procedures. We're then able to create our tables. Now, the here, demo table 1. But what you would want to see here is the likelihood is that you potentially could have an object which is exactly the same name, just under a different schema, okay? And I just wanted to show you this so that you can have that, right? Because the likelihood is, what do you need to have in place to be able to implement those additional objects of the same name under a different schema? The same with our table 2. We apply those, save that, and then for our stored procedures, just like we had before, to go and populate those. And our second one. We're good to go. All right. With that in place, we're then able to do our build, okay, which will go and, like we did before, go and make sure that we haven't made any errors with the particular builds, okay. Once that has complete, we should be good with those pre-configured scripts. We would then be able to deploy those. Unfortunately, due to it not, we'll give it another try, but we'll just try and do a deployment direct to our environment, or actually we might choose the 2016 environment to deploy to. 2016 DP create, and we'll just publish it directly. And that should hopefully, well, we know it'll go past the build, but then deploy those objects into our 2016 environment for our DP create project. At that point in time, what we would be able to do is, if we needed to, we could use the schema compare, right, to check the differences between our environments when our colleagues are working on them. Or, how are we going for time? Not too bad. Or, if most of you, what you would prefer to be working in is actually in the database and being able to just put the changes straight from the database into our project, we can have a look at that, because I believe today or yesterday, it was announced by Microsoft that in the Insiders edition, and I'll take you across to have a look at that, but we've just had a new release, and there we go, we've been able to succeed, so we can do things that we wanted to. But we can use a new version of the extension at the moment, only in the Insiders. And let's have a look at what that looks like. If we come to Insiders, now for those of you who don't know, you can download the Insiders version of Azure Data Studio, and it means that you get a look at things before they get released to general availability. The thing to take away is that they are not GA approved, okay? So there could be issues, but you get an insight, you're able to work with it, provide feedback back to the product team. So what are we doing here? Well, in our Insiders, we're just going to open our local repository so that we've got our workspace. So we're just going to come to our C presentations, Git repositories. Just like it did for the GA version of it, it's going to set up our workspace so that we can work in this. And once that's completed, what we're going to be able to do, and we can see that it's opened up the script files that we had open because we've opened up that same repository or same workspace, okay? So if we expand out our 2016 environment, which is what we just deployed to, okay? and hopefully it doesn't take us too long to be able to do, we can then go to a database that we've just created, and it's still working through the changes to bring all of the services online. So it's taking a little bit of time for us to make that available, and that's why we're not able to just go straight into my environment. And it looks like we're nearly there. Come on. There we go. So I just expand that out. We come to our database and we'll see here's our DP create that we created. Okay. Now, as a developer, we'd be working in our database and we want to make those, create our code, test it, and then add it to our source control. No problems at all. Well, what we can do is we can say, let's open a file. And if we, let's open a file and no, I don't want to open that. I want to go here, sorry. I want to say a new query, and I created a view, okay, which is just over the top of the two tables that we had created, okay? So we can run that. We've got it against our 2016 environment. And I just need to change to our DP create, execute, and we've created that view. What we've now got available, only in preview, is when I showed you before, we only had the create project from database, but we've now got update project from database. And by doing that means that we're able to deploy straight from our database into our database project, okay? We need to choose our local repository. And so this is where we need to navigate to Git repositories, create, come into our DP create, and we need to choose the project file. And we select create, make sure that we keep the folder structure the same as what we've got. And we've got a couple of options available to us. We can use the view changes in schema compare. If there's lots of changes being undertaken, this is something that you would want to look at using, okay, so that you can choose appropriately the changes that you've had applied and you want to add into the project. Given that we've just created it, we're going to use the apply changes and we'll do the update. Yes, we are sure about that. And that's going now, it's taking my change straight from the database, which I've already tested, and placing it into our database project. Once that's complete, we'd then be able to save that off and push it out to our remote repositories. So while that is completing, we'll just go back to our GA version of the product. Okay, I'll just do a refresh. And for our create, under our control, it hasn't got there yet, but we can see that we've got a number of changes available to us in our source control. What we can then look at doing, and have we completed? No, we haven't, so it's still running. My machine's running slow, and I apologize for that. But to finish things off, what we would look at doing is we need to come out here back to our source control, and we can see that for each of those projects that we've created, we've got a number of changes, okay? So we would want to commit these to our local repository, and your messages are going to be a lot more verbose than this, but given that this is a demo, we're just saying our initial commit, and that's committing these changes to our local repository. we can see that that's complete. I'll just quickly check, see if we have, it's still updating. So my machine is running quite slow. I do apologize for that. But what we would look at doing is from our GA version, okay, we can then say we want to push our commits from our local up to our remote repository. Go, okay. And that's going away and then pushing those up to our Azure DevOps project, therefore allowing our colleagues to have access to these changes that we've just put in place. If everything that I've shown you here with regards to source control, now that has completed successfully, you can, it's all been available to us from commands that we've got. Okay, so all of the type of source control commands, so we've got them here available in the menu options. If you're a command line person, you can do all of this, and if you already know Git, then you can do all of this from the terminal window. If you want to learn how to do this, if you come to the show Git output, I won't do it because it will show us a huge amount of stuff for everything that I've done so far. But you can turn that on, see all of the tasks that you are performing, and these are the commands that are used. So therefore, you can start to learn Git to work in the command line. Just before we finish, but just make sure, see if it has completed for us. There we go, it's updated successfully. And if we come back to our project, and if I just do a refresh on our control, we'll be able to see, why is that not, our view, DP create, that should have created it into here. But we're able to commit this, just like we did for our first one, give it our message. That'll commit locally, and they'll then be able to push that up to our remote repository. While that's finishing, if I duck out to our two remote repositories, we'll come to our Azure DevOps one first because that's what we pushed to, do our refresh, and you'll be able to see that there's my DP import, which is created 3 minutes ago. And if we quickly have a look at our GitHub repository, hopefully it's finished, and there's our DP create that finished 35 seconds ago. So with that, let's dive back into the slides to finish off today's session. Well, what have we covered? We've covered where you can get started. What are the tools you need? Azure DevOps, Git, GitHub or Azure DevOps, SQL Server, the 3 extensions that you need, DACPack, Schema Compare, database projects, creating your local repository, configuring that with your remote repository, creating our first 2 database projects together, and you're now able to start your journey with database code in database projects and source control, all inside of Azure Data Studio. So with that, I did mention that I would place this slide back up on the screen, and I will leave that up on the screen. Thank you for being part of this session. If you do have any questions, I'm happy to take those questions now. Thank you.